now know how Darius deployed his army, because his written instructions were captured after the battle. On the left wing were Bactrian and Scythian cavalry from the steppes of Asia. Their job was to halt the charge of the companion cavalry.
Darius had set up Gaugamela to have a tremendous amount of heavy cavalry of his own fronting his left, so that Alexander would have to fight through rank after rank of really crack horsemen.
The Persians themselves were in the center of the line, with the king and his royal entourage. In front of Darius were the baggage elephants and another 50 chariots. On the right wing were troops from Syria, Mesopotamia, and the Persian Gulf, and 100 charioteers in scythe-wheeled chariots. Like all Greek commanders before him, Alexander organized his infantry in a phalanx formation. These blocks of troops presented a wall of spears to the enemy. The first 5 ranks leveled their spears to the front, while those to the rear held their spears at 75 degrees to deflect incoming javelins. But unlike previous commanders, he combined the power of the phalanx with the flexibility of a fast-moving cavalry attack.
The Macedonian army, as developed by Philip first and perfected by Alexander, was really like the smart bomb of the ancient world. It was light years beyond the Greek phalanx, which was essentially just heavy infantry advancing in a solid front and beating each other's brains out.
It was a style of battle that's sometimes called sword and shield battle. The Macedonian phalanx functioned as a shield, and the companion cavalry acted as the offensive sword.
At Gaugamela, Alexander organized a phalanx of Macedonians with cavalry on either side, but he also placed a rear phalanx behind them, made up of mercenaries and allies. He knew that his own adventurous cavalry tactics could leave his infantry vulnerable to attack from the flanks and the rear. His second phalanx would deal with such a threat.
Alexander didn't seem to suffer from pre-battle nerves. In fact, he overslept. It was high noon by the time he joined his troops.
The two armies advanced in the line of battle. Darius had the terrain on his side. The wide plain was perfect for him to deploy his superior numbers, and of course his cavalry. At 5 to 1, the Persians far outnumbered Alexander. In order to avoid being outflanked, Alexander led his cavalry off to the right, towards the edge of the Persian line. Darius's cavalry moved off in the same direction to keep pace with Alexander. These outflanking maneuvers worked to Alexander's advantage, drawing both sides away from the ground which had been specially cleared for Darius's chariots. Darius saw what was happening and ordered his left wing to advance. To avoid being surrounded, Alexander charged straight into the Persians.
What Alexander looked for in his battles was an opening in the enemy formation. As soon as he saw that, Alexander would lead a charge of his companion cavalry straight at that gap.
The Battle of Gaugamela was underway. It was big in every sense. 300,000 men fighting over miles of desert, with the Persian Empire as the prize. Alexander's charge seemed suicidal. It was a terrible struggle, with the Macedonians heavily outnumbered.
Well, they always say that when you're fighting against superior odds, it's like wrestling a bear. You got to get your blade into his heart before his paws wrap around you and crush you to death.
The cavalry battle left the Macedonian phalanx unprotected. Darius decided that now was the moment to smash it apart with his side-wheeled chariots. 100 of them stood ready to be launched against the Macedonian spearmen. Once the phalanx was broken, Darius's army could encircle Alexander and his cavalry, and the young king's Persian adventure would come to a bloody end. The Battle of Gaugamela. It is 331 BC. Alexander the Great is battling against the army of Darius of Persia. At stake, control of Asia, from the Black Sea to the borders of India. Darius has decided to send his side chariots into action. The charioteers raced toward the Greek phalanx. Ahead of them was a wall of razor-sharp spears. And for the men of the phalanx, there was a side of 100 chariots bearing down on them, each with 3-foot-long scalpel-sharp blades whizzing around the wheel hubs. But Alexander's battle-hardened troops held their nerve. At the last moment, when the chariots were almost on top of the phalanx, they opened their ranks and the chariots passed harmlessly through. For the charioteers, however, there was little hope. As they drove down the open-ended ranks, hundreds of javelins and spears finished them off.
He had really crack javelineers and archers out front, and he was able to fire at the horses. If you just would nail one horse in a 4-horse team, that would completely, the whole team would go.
Meanwhile, Alexander and his cavalry had gained the upper hand. Darius took cavalry from the center of his line to send his reinforcements. As they moved, they left a gap. Alexander spotted it immediately, wheeled to the left and charged straight into the gap, and straight at the Persian king.
At only one point on the field did Alexander achieve numerical superiority, but that was at the crucial point when he was charging at Darius.
The Macedonian phalanx followed right behind Alexander. The Persian battle line was broken. Once again, Darius turned and fled.
When the rest of his army saw their king and his entourage fleeing, they naturally figured, well, if he's fleeing, why are we still standing here risking our lives?
But the battle was far from over. Part of the Persian cavalry managed to break away and attacked Alexander's left-wing cavalry.
And if that wing of Alexander's army were to have given way, particularly given way soon, that would have unhinged Alexander's whole battle plan and probably prevented him from winning a victory, if not led to outright defeat.
But once again, the brilliance of Alexander's tactics saved the day. He had created the rear phalanx for just such an emergency. Now it swung into action and came to the rescue, pushing back the Persian cavalry. When the word got out that Darius had run away, the huge Persian army began to retreat. Now the whole Macedonian army rushed forward on the heels of the Persians.
Darius abandoned everything as he fled for his life. At Issus, he had left his wife and his daughters. This time at Gaugamela, vast amounts of treasure, weapons, and even the royal chariot were left behind. But Darius had gotten away again.
Casualty figures in ancient battles often owed more to propaganda than to fact. The Greek historian Arrian reports that Alexander lost only 100 men, while Darius lost 300,000. Even allowing for such huge exaggeration, the Persians would have suffered very heavy losses. Armies suffered their worst casualties when in full-scale retreat.
Alexander pursued Darius for 9 months, but the two would never meet again. Darius was stabbed by one of his own generals and left by the roadside to die. Alexander wrapped his own cloak around the dead king. He had Darius' murderers executed and gave him a royal funeral.